she refused to keep her fat mouth shut. It was a great spilling of the tea.
I wanted my money back. It was very disappointing.
They are pretending like Rachel Zegler is the first of them all when she looks like Lord Farquaad in the film.
The Snow White version is woke and feminist and progressive.
Rachel Zegler, like so many kids raised on TikTok, she's all for infantada is the only global solution.
Rachel Zegler, she's an...
Or what?
They're leaning into woke. Hardcore.
They're petrified of some kind of backlash.
If it ain't broken, don't fix it. Leave it the alone.
So she comes off as an insufferable, whiny brat.
Of course, like with everything on the left these days, they just take it too far. It just doesn't make any sense.
It makes a little bit more sense.
You can gaslight people so easily.
Yes.
The new Disney boss babe, who is Rachel Zegler, the inverse of happy.
Nobody wants a movie about true love? What kind of woman do we want out there seeking true love, Eliana? The outrage.
So the two stars hate each other.
Now, I'm guessing that she's not married. I'm guessing that she doesn't have kids. The movie is a complete disaster, by the way.
Every way that Disney changed the story, it changed it for the worse.
So apparently, according to them and according to the writers of Snow White, women can't even want to be in love anymore.
But you tell me, you're not Hollywood guys, but you are political oddsmen. So what do you think the odds are of this person working ever again?
One of the main arguments surrounding the live-action Snow White is its attempt to fix what some see as outdated gender roles in the original 1937 animation. The classic Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs presents its protagonist as the embodiment of traditional femininity, gentle, nurturing, and dependent on a prince to save her. Many modern audiences and critics have debated whether this portrayal reinforces outdated stereotypes of women as passive and submissive. Rachel Zegler, the actress playing Snow White in the live-action adaptation, made it clear in several interviews that she did not agree with the original film's portrayal of the character. She openly criticized the love story, saying that Snow White is not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. Instead, the new film attempts to reframe the protagonist as a strong, independent leader. But does this actually make the story better, or does it feel forced and out of place? This shift in characterization sparked controversy because many felt that Disney was unnecessarily rewriting a classic fairy tale to fit modern feminist ideals, rather than respecting its original charm. The idea of a princess who values kindness and romance doesn't necessarily mean she is weak, but the live-action film seems to reject these traits altogether, as if they are inherently problematic. The irony is that in trying to create a more empowered version of Snow White, the filmmakers ended up stripping away her defining characteristics. Instead of being gentle and kind, this version of Snow White is portrayed as a leader commanding a group of characters who were originally meant to be her protectors and friends. Rather than adding depth to her character, the film seems to erase what made Snow White unique in the first place. The debate over this shift highlights a bigger issue in modern Hollywood, the tendency to rework classic female characters under the assumption that femininity equals weakness. But is it really empowering to reject softer, more traditional traits? Or does it simply replace one stereotype with another? One of the biggest changes in this live-action adaptation is how the characters have been completely reinterpreted. Instead of staying true to the original dynamics, the film transforms Snow White into a revolutionary leader, completely shifting the tone of the story. In the 1937 classic, Snow White was portrayed as kind, nurturing, and grateful for the dwarfs' hospitality. She found refuge in their home, and in return, she showed appreciation by taking care of them, cooking, and cleaning, not as a sign of submission, but as an expression of her caring nature. But in this version, Snow White takes control the moment. She steps into the dwarfs' home. Instead of appreciating their hospitality, she immediately starts giving them orders. The movie reframes the classic whistle while you work scene to be about Snow White training the dwarfs as if they were an unruly, disorganized group of workers who needed leadership. Think about this for a second. These characters are miners. They work an extremely physically demanding job, spending their days in underground caves. Yet, the film presents them as clueless and chaotic, requiring Snow White, a complete outsider, to teach them how to maintain their own home. And what does she do? Absolutely nothing. She doesn't pick up a broom, she doesn't help clean, she just delegates all the work to them while acting as their superior. This feels completely disconnected from the original Snow White's personality. Instead of being kind and grateful, she's now commanding and self-important. This change was clearly made to push a certain idea, that Snow White must be a leader, even if it means disregarding basic human interactions. But here's the irony. In trying to make her a strong, independent woman, the movie actually makes her unlikable. She shows no gratitude, no warmth, warmth, and no real connection to the characters around her. Instead, she's placed in a position of power simply because the story demands it, not because she earns it. This is a prime example of how forced messaging can backfire. Instead of creating a compelling modern female character, the movie strips Snow White of what made her beloved in the first place. Leadership isn't about giving orders, it's about earning respect. And this version of Snow White doesn't earn anything. And let's not even start on the dwarfs themselves, or rather, the lack of them. Instead of the 7 iconic, uniquely charming dwarfs from the original, we now have a group of generic, diverse bandits. The filmmakers seemingly wanted to remove the classic characters to avoid controversy, but ended up creating a completely pointless group that serves no real narrative purpose. This, once again, raises an important question. If you have to change everything about a story, then why adapt it at all? One of the most controversial aspects of the live-action Snow White was the casting of Rachel Zegler in the lead role. Now let's get one thing straight. This isn't about Rachel herself, her acting skills, or even her ethnicity. The issue here is how Disney handled the concept of diversity in this film. In the original story, Snow White's physical beauty is a key part of the plot. Her skin is white as snow, and that's what makes the evil queen jealous in the first place. Instead of addressing this theme in a meaningful way, Disney decided to sidestep it altogether. They cast a Latina actress and then redefined what Snow White means, claiming it has nothing to do with her appearance. But here's the problem. If the film wanted to challenge beauty standards, it didn't commit to that message at all. The magic mirror, which traditionally judges beauty, barely emphasizes Snow White's looks in this version. Instead, it says that the queen's beauty is shallow, while Snow White's is internal. Think about that for a second. The story completely changes the original conflict from an obsession with physical beauty to a vague idea of inner worth. And let's be real, when someone tells you, "Oh, you have inner beauty," you don't exactly take that as a compliment, right? It feels like a backhanded way of saying, "You're not physically attractive, but at least you're nice." So, if the goal was to modernize the concept of beauty, the film didn't just fail, it ignored the entire conversation. This could have been a great opportunity to explore the pressure women feel about their appearance, to update the mirror's role in a way that felt natural. But instead, the film avoids the topic completely and makes it meaningless. And that's not the only issue with the diversity in this film. Instead of giving us a well-thought-out, engaging take on representation, Disney just threw in a random group of characters with no depth, no backstory, and no relevance to the actual plot. They exist purely to tick off diversity checkboxes, something audiences can spot from a mile away. This kind of lazy representation doesn't help anyone. If anything, it just makes people more frustrated with the way Hollywood forces diversity, without integrating it naturally into the story. And honestly, that's exactly what happened here. Now let's talk about one of the biggest surprises, or should I say, forced ideological insertions, in this live-action remake. Believe it or not, the central theme of this movie is class struggle. Yes, Disney took Snow White and somehow turned it into a story about proletarian revolution. From the very beginning, the film makes it clear that the evil queen is not just evil, she is the personification of capitalism. She hoards diamonds in her castle while the common people starve. The message? Wealth inequality is the real villain here. The so-called prince isn't a prince at all. Instead, he's a thief, a Robin Hood type, stealing food to survive. And what happens? The queen punishes him, reinforcing the idea that the ruling class suppresses the poor. But here's where things get really bizarre. Snow White's beauty is directly linked to her class consciousness. At the beginning of the film, the magic mirror actually tells the queen that she is the fairest of them all. But the moment Snow White realizes the injustice of the system, she suddenly becomes more beautiful. Yes, you heard that right. According to this movie, Snow White only becomes the fairest when she awakens her inner Karl Marx, and this creates a massive plot hole. If beauty in this version is tied to morality, then why was the evil queen ever considered fairest in the first place? If her cruelty makes her less beautiful, why would she try to kill Snow White? Wouldn't that just make her even uglier? It completely contradicts the movie's own logic. But it gets worse. The entire plot of the movie shifts into a revolutionary uprising, where Snow White and the working class overthrow the queen. And when they finally succeed, the movie declares that a reign of love has begun. What does that look like? Well, in the final scene, everyone is dressed in white, celebrating in a bizarre, cult-like ceremony. Given all the recent scandals in Hollywood, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to see how weird this looks. Seriously, after all the controversy surrounding certain Hollywood elites, a white-dressed party scene was the worst possible choice. At this point, the movie has nothing to do with Snow White anymore. It's not a fairy tale. It's not a love story. It's not even a coming-of-age journey. It's just a political lecture disguised as a Disney movie. And the worst part? It's not even well executed. At this point, it's obvious that Snow White isn't just a reimagining, it's a complete ideological rewrite. The film isn't focused on telling a timeless fairy tale. Instead, it seems more concerned with pushing a political message, even at the cost of coherent storytelling. The queen is no longer just a jealous villain obsessed with beauty. Now she represents capitalism, hoarding wealth and diamonds while the people suffer in poverty. Snow White doesn't just fight for her survival, she becomes a revolutionary, awakening to the oppression around her and deciding to overthrow the monarchy. The message? A classic case of class struggle, with the queen as the oppressor and Snow White as the liberator of the working class. But here's the problem. This doesn't fit Snow White's story at all. Snow White was never about class warfare, and forcing this narrative into the film feels artificial and forced. It's not just an adaptation, it's an entirely different movie that happens to borrow the name Snow White, while discarding everything else that made the original story compelling. And let's talk about that final scene, the so-called reign of love. After the queen is defeated, we get this bizarre, almost cult-like gathering where everyone is dressed in white, celebrating their revolution. Now, given recent Hollywood controversies, it's impossible to ignore how this white party scene carries some unintended connotations. I mean, really, after all the scandals we've seen lately, who thought this was a good idea? But beyond that, it reinforces the film's biggest flaw. It's trying so hard to send a message that it forgets to tell a good story. At the end of the day, audiences don't go to see Snow White for a political lecture. They want a great fairy tale with heart, adventure, and timeless themes. Instead, we get a disjointed narrative that alienates both classic Disney fans and even the audience it tries to appeal to. And that's the irony. By forcing so many progressive messages without proper execution, the film actually creates backlash against those very ideas. Instead of promoting inclusivity, it ends up feeling exclusionary. Instead of empowering its characters, it strips them of their essence. Instead of making history, it will likely be remembered as one of Disney's biggest missteps. So, after everything we've seen, what's the final takeaway? Disney attempted to modernize Snow White, but instead of enhancing the classic tale, they completely dismantled it. The movie doesn't feel like a faithful adaptation, nor does it succeed as a compelling reimagination. It's stuck in a strange in-between, where the heart of the original story is lost, and what remains is a hollow attempt at pushing vague messages that contradict each other. The film claims to be about empowerment, yet it strips Snow White of the very charm and kindness that made her beloved in the first place. It pushes for diversity, but in a way that feels artificial and disconnected from the narrative. It tries to critique capitalism, but does so in a way that feels shallow and out of place in a Snow White adaptation. And in the end, instead of celebrating its protagonist's journey, it leaves audiences confused and disconnected. It didn't need to be this way. There were so many ways to modernize Snow White without losing its essence. They could have expanded on the lore, given more depth to the characters, and explored themes like self-worth and beauty in a way that felt meaningful. Instead, we got a messy, unfocused film that alienates both fans of the original and new audiences alike. At this point, Disney's live-action remakes have become a gamble. Some, like Cinderella 2015 and The Jungle Book 2016, managed to add new layers while respecting the core story. Others, like The Little Mermaid 2023 and Mulan 2020, left audiences divided. But Snow White? It might just be one of their biggest misfires yet. Now, I want to hear from you. If you've seen the movie, what are your thoughts? Do you think Disney made the right creative choices, or do you agree that they missed the mark? Drop a comment below, let's get the discussion going. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into the biggest hits and flops of Hollywood. See you in the next video.